Uh, that's that's such a powerful sound. Um, Friends, it is a joy to welcome Rick Young to our virtual table today. Rick is currently the president of the Texas Presbyterian Foundation. Before that, he was with the Board of Pensions. He has had, I was going to say illustrious career, but I almost said the word infamous career in the church. Maybe both of those things are true.
I think both are fair.
Yeah. Um, we are excited to have you. One of the things that I think is just really fun every time I talk to Rick is that just not only his breadth and depth of knowledge, but his work with his own board at Texas Presbyterian Foundation, his work on about 1,000 other boards across the denomination, his work with sessions and elders and churches and small churches and big churches, lots of things. And so we are grateful to have you with us, Rick, and I'm going to kick it over to you.
All right, thank you. It would help me if you could, if each of you would pause for a moment and think of the answer to this question. And this question is, what do you hope or wish that your board would do more of, and what they should do less of? I turn it over for your answers. So more active support, less just showing up to a monthly meeting. That's from Neil. Others? Well, then y'all, I don't know why I need to talk to you, because you all have perfect boards. Yeah, I wish they would do something, anything. That I will tell you that from my experience working with boards, and so that you all are aware, I came out of the church after 27 years in the pastorate, and then instantly moved into working with boards. So it was an abrupt change, but one of the things that, and I'm going to use some definitions so that may help you know where I may be coming from. There's a difference in the understanding of a board of trustees versus a board of directors. And that understanding is in a board of trustees, if you were to go check that out on Google or wherever, you would find that the board of trustees is a group that, for the most part, is seeing things from probably 10,000 feet. So what the, sorry, but 10,000 feet. So they're looking down at the board or at your work, not expecting to be really daily involved in activities. Where you go and get a board of directors, they take the word, oftentimes take the word direct very personally. They feel like, oh, well, then I'm a board of directors, so I need to guide the organization and be involved. What I would tell you in that process is oftentimes the terms get completely mixed together, and you may have people on a board that come with the expectation of either one. So you may get a member of a board who comes on the board and comes from corporate America and feels like they need to be directly involved, sometimes to the detriment of you and your organization. It's vitally important that the definitions are laid out to the board as you begin the process. Uh, we actually here at TPF, I have a 2-page sheet that every board member signs every year with expectations. And those expectations are laid out. They attend meetings. They go from there to all the way down to support, how they support us, etc. So it is not one of those where they come in and don't know what my expectations of them are. I will say that the board here at TPF is a very experienced board. Most have served on other boards, but they see themselves and understand themselves as a board of trustees. So they're not in our daily business. They're not trying to run things for us, etc. So it's really important that they have a clear understanding. Unfortunately, sometimes you walk into a board and you're the new person on the block, so to speak. So what they're doing then is you have to adapt to the way that they see themselves. My guess is in today's world, if you were to ask a board, and I've served on many, if you were to ask a board, what's your role, you'd probably get as many different answers as there are people in the room, because they're going to come at it differently, depending who elects the board makes a difference. If it is if you're associated as an associate pastor, say, out of a church, then then it may be a session or it may be a committee. Got the question from Jeannie asking about what we lay out. I mean, I literally lay out expectations when it comes to dress. I lay out expectations when it comes to, I phrase it differently. I used to put up a sign when I was in the church that for session meetings, I used to put a sign outside the door that said, "No one asks you to turn off your brain." I don't want yes people on the board. I don't want people who have previous agendas either, but in the process of that, it's important that they see what is expected of them. Actually, I lay out in that we lay out all the scheduled meeting dates for the year, and their expectation to be at those. I have a little more power with my board after 10 years than I did in the beginning. I started, and 2 weeks later, we had our first board meeting, and it was like, eye-opening would be an understatement. They said, "Well, how are things going?" Well, I don't know. I just barely been here, but we lay out expectations of whether I actually lay out that we'd like them to give us one referral of a potential partner with TPF. We don't raise money. I mean, our existence is not based on an endowment or even resources coming in, because what we do is we manage money for nonprofit organizations. So I'm never asking board members for money. We do have our own endowment. They're not asked by me. They may be asked by others if they will give something to the endowment. But that is not an expectation that is spelled out. It's we because I want to be able to say when we go out and work with other organizations that we don't raise money for ourselves. So that expectation is not there. Sure, that's very, very different for the organizations that you work with, because you are raising funds. Uh, One of the other expectations is that they will serve as ambassadors for our organization. And when I'm in a city where one of them live, I'm regularly calling upon them to say, will you come with me to a meeting? Because I think it's important that they see what we do internally, but I think it's also important that the folks we're visiting with are also seeing that we have an active board. That come close, Jenny? Uh, I don't know how you get your board members, but we have here and kind of how the process has worked over the years is we have a governance committee, quote unquote, that serves as a nominating committee. That nominating committee is always open to suggestions for names. And we're asking for only two things when you get a board member on DPF, and that is either wealth or wisdom. I don't need folks with a whole lot of the other skills because it's a hardworking board. Our board only meets in person 2 times a year. The investment committee meets another 2 times a year. Used to be in person, now we're doing it this lovely way. But there is the expectation. I will tell you, because those expectations have been laid out, our attendance at a board meeting is about 95%. They show up, they do the work. When I started here, we had 2 committees on our board. One was the investment committee, and the other was ministry services committee. The investment committee, the first meeting I went to, the investment committee met in the ballroom of a hotel and had all the snacks, had everything they needed. And we have a board of 24, that was 18. The other 6 who served on ministry services met in a cleaned out hotel room with lousy air conditioning and no snacks for their 3-hour meeting. I said after that meeting, we will never, ever do that again. Why in the world would I want to have a committee on a board of people who are busy and treat them as second-class citizens? So it's really important that they're doing important work that is meaningful work. If they're not invested. And if they're not invested, you really can't, it's very, very difficult to have folks show up. They're busy. They're extremely busy and have a lot of other opportunities to do other things. So I always tried to make sure that our agendas are thorough, that they're meaningful, and that the meetings start on time and end on time. Uh, as Jeannie said, uh, I had been on the been in the ministry for 27 years in the local church, and it was very different coming over to working with a board of trustees all of a sudden. So took me a while to get used to that and get used to the difference in how they operate. I mean, uh, versus the church where it was a session, then with the session, uh, I knew I was called to there. Here, technically, the Board of Trustees is the one who hires and fires me, which puts it in a different place. So it's working through some of that process. I'm going to breathe for a minute and see if you all have questions on that part before I jump to others.
So I was asking how many folks, when you said 24 folks served on the board or serve on your board, how many serve on everybody else's? So Elizabeth, you've got 9. And then Neil has 6 reps, and then 1 at large, and then 2 students. So also 9, if I can add. I'm like, how many? Matt, Micah, Kathy, Nancy, Sam, like what about everybody
Matthew
else?
has 14.
And 6. Oh yeah. And so everybody is being very, very quiet, and that's wonderful. But Neil?
Yeah, I was going to ask Rick a question. You mentioned meaningful work as one of the things you always include in the agenda. What makes it meaningful, and what's an idea? What's an example of that meaningful work that you are sure to incorporate in your agenda each time?
One of the things, and it's a wonderful question. One of the things that it took me a while to get there. It didn't happen overnight, and so one of the pieces is I really needed to get to know needed to get to know the board members and where they were coming from. So I would tell you, when I started, we were more along the lines of a literal dog and pony show where we just had speakers from TPF employees standing up and saying, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, so forth and so on. So we have changed that with the board's help, that we do a more thorough check-in first and foremost. So it's literally a chance and an opportunity to answer, whether it be a faith question. Our last board meeting, one of the questions that we began a committee meeting was how did you learn about the internet, and what was your first action on the internet? Which I thought at first was kind of a weird question, but then everyone got involved and started laughing and sharing with one another. I always want to make sure that we've got one of those questions like that, but also that we have something that they can put their arms around. One of the questions we used a couple of times ago was literally, how can a trustee help TPF? And I have been with enough boards and on enough boards that I don't need anybody on my board who thinks it's an honorary position. I'd rather have an empty seat than an honorary position. It's not helpful. And my nominating committee, when I was in the church, would come to me and they would say, we can nominate them because we think it would really help them get more active. Never worked. Yeah, you were dead before you even hit the water. And so what I ended up doing, and the same thing I do here with this board, literally is say, here's the skill set we need. It's not just anyone, it's what skill set do I need? And that may be hands working with students. And when those expectations are given to, whether it be the church that appoints folks to your board, you do it, however it works, then it draws them in. And one of the things we want to that I make sure of, and actually my staff makes sure of, is that our board knows how their actions have made a difference. We had a meeting about three times ago, and we asked, what do we need to do to continue to reach out? And one board member said, we would love to see a video on how you work through the process. The next meeting, we could present that video and say, thank you, you made a difference, and this is where we came from. Neil, it may not be meaningful work at that meeting, but it's meaningful work that they can look at and point to and say, we made a difference there. Does that?
Absolutely. Super helpful. Thank you, Rick.
So one of the things that I've learned is we're actually pretty, even though we do it all the time, we're pretty poor at telling our own story. And the board needs to hear those stories of how your ministry is affecting and changing lives, because it is. I wouldn't be where I was today if it wasn't for the chaplain at Trinity University in San Antonio. But those stories are there to tell, and we need to tell them better. And we need to figure out how to not only tell them better, but how to tell them more often and to the right ears. That's the hard one of how do we get to those right ears. Did I come close?
So just to pause real quick, one of you tell a story. Do you have a story that you sort of go to and say, this is the impact that the ministry had this year, during pandemic or during COVID?
My go-to is about a student who, as far as we know, is the first student that came to us through our website and just a blind internet search, looking for a place to come through. And she was reading up. She came from a tradition where her family had kind of just drawn away from the church, so didn't really grow up churched, but has begun to develop some faith convictions of her own and was looking for ministries with certain things. And so she read our invitational description on our website and she joined us. she has only in the month of April, so she joined us for the first time in September. It was until the month of April when she met any other person in our ministry in person, because we were online for this whole year. And when I talked to her about it in probably January, February, she just, was one of the new students that hung in with us virtually the whole year. And I kind of asked, how did you come? And she said, it really is a community. And she said, everything that was on was my experience. And it means a lot. And now she's talking about wanting to be more involved and can't wait till we're in person this fall and that sort of thing. So that's one of the go-tos from this pandemic.
Thanks, Neil. What about others?
I'll share. We had a freshman who grew up in Presbyterian church. Her mom's a youth director, and she had come to an early event and just came once, and then she was involved, or her major pretty much required an excessive amount of time, interior design or something like that. And she decided to change majors and so that she could get out more. And she started coming to our Monday lunches. And the first one, I had been exposed to COVID, and so I had to go get tested and had to do it quickly. And so I ended up having to cancel the lunch. And she had this reaction of like, I tried to show up and no one was there. And so we kind of, was able to connect with her and found out and had chatted with her. And then every Monday she showed up and got to know more and more people and started coming to Thursday nights. And I had asked her to speak at our annual board meeting. And she said, this made my spring semester good and made me want to stay at this school, because I could show up on Monday and maybe it's just Matt and I having lunch, or it's Matt and I and like 4 other students, and we're just sitting outside eating lunch together. So it started out even with just a very poor experience to move to something that was her sticking with it, which was great.
It's a wonderful story, really is. And a board with that kind of story, Matthew, a board then can see this is making a difference, and and there's a need there for that. So to me, one of the keys, and it's an early key, and I think when Jeannie and I were talking about it earlier today, you're going to spend a little more time on it next week. But one of the things that will help your board is solid education on what you do. They may have cushy ideas about what you do, but literally even sharing some numbers of we meet for lunch on Monday. COVID has completely skewed all this, completely aware of that. But once as we move back to whatever normal is going to look like, these are the activities that we do. This is who we reach, and almost a stat sheet, so to speak, of here's who we are and this is what we do, and that's why your being here makes that much difference, because I'm not even sure. I was around a good bit of during my college years a long time ago, but of what's involved and what you do. How does your week fill out? But I think that's important for your board to know. Your board needs to know that. And please, the last thing I want you to do is keep a literal daily diary and go, I spent 2 minutes on the phone with. Please never give that to anybody, because then they will be micromanaging you. I can probably, why did you talk to so and why did you talk to Martha for an hour? Not helpful. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. Again, it's an overview of who you are rather than a minute by minute display. And my guess is that, let's see, how can we bridge the gap between what we do as a ministry and what the board can do? Okay, good question. What I would say is a way to bridge the gap is to involve them some. Let's say, Matthew, you pick up the phone to one of your board members and say, how about coming and having lunch with me with these students on a Monday? And actually rotate through your board of who comes and shares on Monday. The Thursday event. What if they took part of a leadership role? What if that was an expectation of board members? I expect you to come and share lunch with the group and do some leadership. There are some that are going to put up their hands fast and go, whoa, that's more than I ever agreed to, and I don't. And when those people leave, it's most of the time, don't let the door hit them in the butt when they leave. Hallelujah. Maybe I can get somebody on here that wants to really help. And in fact, what we do with our board is you can serve three-year terms on TPF's board. But that's not a guarantee. We don't say, oh, we're going to get you for 9 years. It is, we'll look at it at year 2.5 of each one of those terms and figure out if this is still where you want to be, and is this still where we want you to be. If you're not coming to meetings, you're not participating, then maybe it's just not the time to serve on this board. It's a much harder gap for you all to get over than it is for mine. And I would be the first to tell you, you're dealing with a different animal, but I think if they become personally involved and have some skin in the game, instead of just the expectation that I come and sit at a meeting, that'll change some things. The other thing, I think if you brought the expectations forward and said, hey, this is going forward, this is what we expect, my guess is you'll have some who will raise their hand and say, maybe it's time for somebody else. That's not a bad thing. And again, anybody who looks at this totally as a wonderful way to build their resume by being on a board, you don't want to have anything to do with them. They're going to be a pain.
I think, Rick, when you were saying about telling the right stories and hearing the right ears, I take that to the board level, and not every board member is created equal as far as the skill set they bring. And I think that's one of the challenges, but also opportunities that we have to think through intentionally. We just don't always have, we don't always feel like we have the time to think through that intentionally with our board development, but not every board member is going to be a great person to interact with students, but they might have a different skill set to bring to the table, and trying to find those right pieces in play, that it's not a one size fits all, but
Right.
trying to find the right players in the right position
Right.
is something I think is important. I wonder if you've had experience with that you could share.
One of the things that we've done in the process is literally on the information sheet that I get, or the data sheet that I get on all board members, I literally almost do a time and talent type sheet of where your skills coming from. Somewhat like we used to do in the church with the time and talent pledge card. It was, okay, you can't give a lot of money, but maybe you can help us with here. The key on that is, and I failed miserably early on, was I made the list way too long, and I didn't need about a third of what was on that list. I mean, it was nice, but it wasn't anything I needed help with. We did find an individual who, bless her heart, I think if I had called on her at a meeting, she would have withered away and shrunk under the table. She was that shy. But she was a gifted photographer. And so I wasn't going to call on her in a meeting, but I met with her during and before the meeting and said, you could give us such a gift by taking our photos. So and would you mind going with us when we go out and visit one of the projects that we're helping support? So literally it was, okay, this person is not going to stand up in front of a room and talk about TPF, or really isn't going to be very helpful besides smiling at a presentation. But it lifted her so much that she could just walk around with a camera and shoot and get pictures. And those pictures became part of the story. So I agree wholeheartedly. It is not a plug and fit routine of, I need this, you've got to fit this. We've got to look at what they bring to the table as well. I saw another question, but I probably missed it. So
Elizabeth asked, what combination of skill sets would you say makes for a well-rounded board, particularly for the context of campus ministry?
For Elizabeth, how much of what you need the board to do has to do with finances?
A lot.
Okay. So you need a mix of skill sets. You don't need all investment bankers. God help you if you have all investment bankers, because all they're going to do is wear green visors and focus on a financial sheet. And what I've said is you need a good mix. And I tell churches that we work with the same way. You need a good mix of cheerleaders. In other words, people who can tell the story, who have been affected by the story, but are excited about the ministry. If you had all financial people in a room, I guarantee you'd have the cleanest ledger you'd ever seen, but there wouldn't be anybody coming in to help. So skill set would be, there needs to be some financial on yours. I would say that an overall view of what ministry is would be helpful. I think you could almost use anybody. I think if you get an overload of any one piece of skill sets, that's when you get backed into a corner. It's kind of we need a balance of folks serving on our board. If I had all investment people here, we'd get along just great, but we'd never grow. Because I need people here with a skill set that they're comfortable of meeting with people, that they understand the church, because we work with 400 different congregations. So one of the other pieces that we've tried to make sure of here, and it's a little different again for you, is to have representatives of the large organizations as well as the smaller organizations. I've had to learn and re-instruct myself on a regular basis of just remember that we're working with people that $500 is a lot of money. So don't use illustrations that talk about, well, I got a gift of $1 million. Because what happens then is about 2 seconds into that conversation, they're going, I don't have anybody with $1 million. Are you kidding? So a good marketing person would certainly be helpful. I think for you all, it would be especially helpful if there was somebody skill set of the social media, especially with the students today who, as I think Matthew said, they discovered that ministry online. And so does that help kind of?
So there was a campus minister who couldn't be with us today, but when you said that about somebody to help with social media, he was sharing that his board expects him to do all of that, that he does all the finances and all the social media and all of the scheduling of students and the storytelling and things like that. And one of his questions was sort of, how do you begin to shift those kinds of expectations? Or how do you explain to your board, look, if you take some of this, then I can do, ministry.
Yeah. For some boards, it's going to be a really slow shift because they don't want to shift that. They're very comfortable saying, we pay you, so you get to take care of all of that. It's a totally unfair way of looking at the ministry in my mind. It's and the way to shift it is the way to shift it in the process may be an educational piece on even a pie chart. Please, not minutes and seconds and other things again, but almost a pie chart of this is how I spend an average year. And you're looking at finance being doing all the financial reports as a huge piece. You're looking at the administration being a huge piece. And then all of a sudden, this little sliver that sits here says ministry, direct ministry with students or others. It's to be presented as an educational piece, not as a woe is me piece. The last thing your board wants to hear is whining. of, ain't it awful? If y'all would just do something, then I could do more. I will tell you, most of the time that response is gonna die pretty quickly. They'll go, well, then maybe we need to find somebody else who can do it all. And you can't. But I would also say that each one of those pieces need to be considered as a part of ministry. It's not that it isn't ministry, it's just not focused on changing souls. Does that make sense? I mean, I consider this ministry, but you don't want to portray it as, well, that's stuff that somebody else needs to take care of, because it needs to be taken care of, but at the same time, you don't want it to be, my guess is that's not what the board is thinking ministry is.
That's really helpful. And in that piece, one of the things that it seems is that board education, like the spiritual development of the board, part of that is education about all of the pieces of the ministry.
I will tell you, in the last church I served, we changed, wasn't totally my idea. An associate had the great idea. And we literally spent the first probably 20 minutes, maybe even more, of that time doing spiritual development. I got pushback early on from people going, whoa, wait a minute. I'm here to do business. That's not why I'm here. But it changed the whole flow of that meeting. We don't ever have a board meeting here at Texas Presbyterian Foundation that doesn't begin with the devotional as well as numerous prayers. A part of that is to help the folks in the room focus on the reason we're here, which is not just to do business, but it's to do God's business. And so I laugh. I was telling somebody yesterday, I said, when I came to TPF, many in the office thought, oh hell, we're getting a minister to run this thing. He's going to be wandering around, praying all over us, laying on hands, doing all sorts of things. We're a financial institution. What in the world are we going to do with a minister? That pretty well got thrown out in a few weeks when I said shit for the first time. They pretty well decided, well, maybe he is human, but so I get it. I get preconceived ideas, etc., where people are coming from, but I can't thank you enough for the ministry that each one of you do, because oftentimes it's a forgotten ministry, and I'm very grateful for each one of you. So please take my thanks as well to you for what you do. So.
We have about 9 or 10 minutes, and so I want to make sure that everybody can get their burning questions. They're very logistical kinds of, what about this kinds of thing. Mike has made some great suggestions in the chat, and so we'll have a different thing, Micah, on Slack. You can teach us all how to use Slack with our board members. So what are some of the final questions that you want to make sure that Rick can answer?
one of the things I would tell you is any way that you can get materials to your board, the further, don't get them too early, but if there's expectations of reading and other things, the sooner you get those to the board will be better. If you expect the board members to come in and be involved and they haven't, and you're handing them a report, they're not going to have time to, or you're not going to get their attention because they're sitting there reading that. So what we've found is we send out all our materials a week in advance, and in those materials are, here's the question that we're going to ask you to answer. So think about it. Nothing worse than throwing or being asked something and all you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs going, golly, I hope he doesn't call on me. If I give them in advance, they know they're going to be called on.
You mentioned the slow shift in some contexts in response to a question you asked. Which would you put the highest priority on in a slow shift situation as far as making necessary changes?
I think I'd put the spiritual probably as the highest, and because that's who you are. And so helping people see that, and that expectation of this is who we are, not just as a board, but this is who we are as a family. May come from different places. So I'd make the shift. The spiritual one would be the first one. And you can help shape some of those depending on which scriptures you choose to have them spend some time looking at. No, I think one of the early ones I used was I want to sit at the right hand of Jesus, and I spun that into how do we do that as a board? Are you here because you want to sit on the right hand, or are you here because you're just as thrilled to sit at the foot of the table? But I trust you all to shape those. You can shape them. What I will tell you is, as you begin that shift, let them know that the shift is beginning. Don't just throw it out there. But we're going to, and it's as simple as saying we're going to spend the first 10 minutes in prayer and in Bible study. And there's going to be pushback. I'm going to tell you, there's going to be pushback because they're looking at it going, well, geez, this just adds 15 minutes to our meeting. Well, there's 15 minutes in all meetings that we could do away with. If anything, Zoom's helped teach us that. I did a board meeting. When did I do the board meeting? About 3 months ago, and they met for 2 days for 8 hours each on Zoom. I had to make sure that there were no sharp objects in the room with me, or I would have stabbed myself. I had, oh golly, just go ahead and kill me. That's not fun. But I would tell you what it did teach is we can do business, but yet at the same time we don't need to beat every horse that walks into the room. So do the slow shift with the devotional side. Jeannie, I've got according to my clock, I've got all of about 2 minutes. So
I was going to say, is there a final question? I mean, I think that, Rick, I invite you to put your email, or any other carrier pigeon, cell phone, any other way that you like to be contacted.
well, it's real easy. It's real easy. It's rick.young@tpf.org. And please feel free to reach out. I love the conversation. So, and again, thank you for what you do.
Yeah. Any other? My last quick question, and then we're going to draw for our book. We are giving away a book. Reverend Mark Elsden, who's at Press House, wrote a book called "We Aren't Broke," and so each time we do a drawing for that. And Nancy, you will get yours from 2 weeks ago. I promise. Last question: should all of the folks here serve as executive directors and campus ministers? Should you have a board member moderate the meeting, or do you suggest for the campus minister / executive director to moderate?
Our board chair moderates, and part of the reason that he, and it's male this year, does is because it's their board. It's not it is my board, but so I want the separation there, and I think they get better participation if they're doing it versus me doing all the talking. I would tell you there are way too many times even that our board chair will turn to me and say, well, what do you, Rick, just take that? And it's like, no, you all really have the capability to do this. But I'd say that also varies by the skill set of the folks sitting around the room. I mean, I've sat with enough boards that incompetent board chair can, oh my goodness, that'll just kill you. I've watched them, and it's like, oh my gosh, just be quiet.
None of us have ever been there.
I'm sure.
And so it is 2:30 Central Time, 3:30 Eastern Time, and Micah, just know it's 2:30 Tennessee time. Just, in case you were forgetting. Thank you so much for being with us. And if anybody has any extra questions, feel free. I'll turn off the recording. You can stay around. And our drawing this week, the book goes to Neil Meyer. Thank you all for being here, and please stay around. And thank you, Rick.
You're welcome. Thank you all.